The wind, a restless phantom, was the first thing Alara truly noticed. It wasn't merely a breeze, it was a living entity, sighing and howling around the ancient stone cottage perched precariously on the cliff edge. She'd driven for hours, the landscape gradually shedding the familiar green of the lowlands for the wild, untamed beauty of the coast, jagged rocks, defiant pines, and the relentless, churning grey of the sea. Now, as she killed the engine of her old Land Rover, the quiet was profound, broken only by that eternal whisper of the wind and the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocks below. The cottage, named Stormsong in the rental listing, was more imposing than pictures suggested. Built of dark, local stone, it seemed to grow out of the very cliff face, its windows like watchful eyes gazing out over the vast expanse of the Atlantic. A single plume of smoke curled from the chimney, an unexpected detail. The listing had promised solitude, a complete escape. Had someone else arrived early? Or was it the caretaker? A flicker of annoyance, quickly quelled, ran through her. She was here for peace, for isolation, for the space to breathe and think. She stepped out, the chill sea air invigorating, immediately tasting salt on her lips. Her long dark hair, usually meticulously pinned, escaped its band and whipped around her face, a wild extension of the landscape. She took a deep, shuddering breath, filling her lungs with the clean, sharp scent of ozone and something else. A faint, earthy aroma of peat and damp earth. Below, the ocean roared, a primal sound that vibrated through the very ground beneath her feet. This was it. This was the edge of the world, and perhaps the beginning of a new one for her. Retrieving her worn leather duffel bag from the back, she made her way to the heavy oak door. It was old, studded with iron, and felt cool beneath her fingers. Before she could knock, it swung inward with a low groan, revealing not an empty hallway, but a man. He stood silhouetted against the warm glow of a fire, tall and broad-shouldered, his presence filling the doorway. The light from behind him cast his features into shadow, but she could discern the lean strength of his frame, the way his dark hair fell carelessly across his brow. He wasn't the elderly caretaker she'd imagined. He was younger, and undeniably arresting. "Elara, I presume?" His voice was a low rumble, surprisingly warm, like the embers of the fire behind him, yet with an edge that spoke of the wildness outside. It carried a faint, almost imperceptible lilt she couldn't quite place. Irish? Scottish? It only added to his mystique. She swallowed, suddenly aware of the wind-tousled state of her hair, the faint smudges of travel on her jeans. "Yes," she managed, her voice a little breathy. "And you are?" "Oh." He stepped aside, gesturing for her to enter. "Rhys, I believe we have a slight scheduling conflict." A hint of a smile played on his lips, though his eyes, she now saw, were a startling shade of green, like the deep shadowed parts of the sea just before a storm. They held an intelligence, a knowing glint that made her feel for a fleeting moment utterly transparent. The interior of the cottage was a revelation. Far from rustic, it was elegantly appointed, a blend of ancient stone walls and modern comfort. A large fireplace dominated one wall, a roaring blaze chasing away the chill. Rich, dark wood furniture, plush throws, and scattered books gave it a lived-in, inviting feel. The scent of wood smoke mingled with something else, a faint, spicy aroma, perhaps from the stew simmering gently on the hob in the open-plan kitchen area. "Scheduling conflict?" Elara repeated, her brow furrowing. "But I booked this cottage months ago." It was confirmed. Rhys leaned against the doorframe, crossing his arms over his chest, a casual pose that somehow emphasized the powerful lines of his body. "As did I. Apparently the booking agency made a rather significant error. Or perhaps," he added, his gaze lingering on hers, "they simply decided we needed to meet." Her heart gave an odd little lurch. The suggestion was audacious, yet his tone was disarmingly playful. "Meet? I came here for solitude, Mr. Rhys. And I, Miss Elara, came for the same. A quiet place to work, to think." He swept a hand around the room. And I found myself here, only to discover it was double booked. I've been here for 2 days already, trying to get hold of the agency. The storms have made the phone lines unreliable. He nodded towards a vintage rotary phone on a small table, clearly defunct. Elara felt a wave of exasperation, quickly followed by a strange, almost thrilling sense of inevitability. So, what now? Do we flip a coin for who gets to stay? He pushed off the doorframe, moving further into the room with an easy, fluid grace. I've already explored that option in my head. And given the weather, and the fact that the nearest alternative accommodation is 50 miles back down a treacherous coastal road, I think a more... He turned to face her fully, his green eyes sparkling in the firelight. There are 2 bedrooms. We could simply share the space until the agency sorts this out or the weather breaks. The proposition hung in the air, bold and unexpected. Sharing a secluded cottage on the edge of the world with a complete stranger, a man who radiated an almost elemental masculinity. Every instinct screamed caution, but another, deeper part of her, one she rarely acknowledged, felt a surprising flutter of intrigue. She looked around the comfortable, spacious living area, then back at him. Are you serious? Completely. His gaze was steady, unwavering. Unless you'd prefer to drive back into the storm? He gestured towards the large window, where the rain had begun to lash against the glass, blurring the already dim twilight. She hesitated, weighing her options. The thought of driving back in the darkening storm, tired and frustrated, was unappealing. And the cottage, it felt right. It felt like the place she was meant to be. Besides, the agency had messed up. He wasn't exactly a squatter. All right, she said, surprising herself with her own capitulation. But we set ground rules, strict ones. A genuine smile now broke across his face, transforming his features, making him even more attractive. Of course, my thoughts precisely, and perhaps to begin you should warm yourself by the fire, you look frozen. He moved towards the hearth, picking up a heavy iron poker and stirring the coals, sending a shower of sparks dancing upwards. Elara moved stiffly, still processing the surreal turn of events. She shrugged off her duffel bag, letting it fall with a thud beside a plush armchair. The warmth of the fire was a welcome embrace after the biting wind. She held her hands out, feeling the heat seep into her chilled skin. She watched Whis, the play of muscle beneath his shirt as he stoked the fire, the easy confidence in his movements. He seemed utterly at home here, as if he belonged to the wildness outside. Tea? Coffee? Or perhaps something stronger to ward off the chill, he offered, without turning, sensing her gaze. Tea would be wonderful, thank you, she replied, a little surprised by the sudden politeness in her own voice. The initial shock was giving way to a strange sense of calm, almost an acceptance. He moved to the small, well-equipped kitchen area, his movements economical and efficient. Soon, the comforting aroma of brewing tea joined the scent of wood smoke and stew. She watched him, noting the way his hands, strong and capable, handled the delicate porcelain mugs. He poured 2 cups, then carried them over, handing one to her. Their fingers brushed, a fleeting contact that sent a jolt of awareness through her. His skin was warm, slightly rough. Milk? Sugar? He asked, his voice low. Just milk, please. He added a splash of milk to her cup, then took a seat in the armchair opposite her, stretching his long legs towards the fire. The silence that fell between them was not awkward, but charged, a nascent energy humming beneath the surface. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the distant roar of the ocean, and the occasional sigh of the wind. So, Elara, he began, taking a slow sip of his tea, his gaze direct and unnervingly perceptive. What brings you to the edge of the world? Are you running from something, or towards it? The question was blunt, cutting through the pleasantries, and it caught her off guard. She wasn't used to such directness, especially from a stranger. She carefully set her mug down on the small rustic table beside her. A little of both, perhaps, she admitted, surprised by her own honesty. I'm a photographer. I came for the light, the landscape, to clear my head. It was a partial truth. The real reason was a recently ended relationship, a sense of creative stagnation, a profound need to reconnect with herself. "The light here is magnificent," he agreed, his eyes sweeping over the vast window where the last vestiges of daylight were fading into a bruised purple. "Especially at dawn and dusk, but it demands patience. And a certain surrender." He paused, his gaze returning to her. "And what about you, Whis? What brings you to this particular storm-battered haven?" He leaned back, his green eyes glinting in the firelight, a faint, almost imperceptible smile playing on his lips. "I'm a writer, a historian specifically. I came for the quiet, for the ghosts that linger in these ancient stones, for the stories whispered by the wind." He gestured vaguely towards the roaring fire. "And for a deadline that is rapidly approaching." "Ghosts?" she echoed, a faint shiver running down her spine, not entirely from the cold. "Oh yes, every old place has them. Echoes of lives lived, loves lost, battles fought. This coast in particular is steeped in history. Shipwrecks, ancient feuds, hidden coves for smugglers. The very air hums with it, if you know how to listen." His voice was low, captivating, weaving a spell around her. She found herself leaning forward, drawn in by his words, by the intensity of his gaze. He had a way of speaking that made the mundane seem extraordinary, the ordinary infused with magic. He wasn't just talking about history. He was talking about the day feel of it, the presences of it. "Do you believe in them?" she asked softly. "I believe in the power of memory, Alara. And memory in a place like this can be a very potent thing." His eyes held hers, a silent challenge, an unspoken connection forming between them in the flickering firelight. The stew on the hob began to bubble more insistently, releasing its rich, savory aroma into the room. Whis rose with an easy grace, breaking their intense connection. "It seems my dinner is ready. There's plenty, if you're hungry." She hadn't realized how hungry she was, until that moment. The long drive, the unexpected encounter, the sheer emotional weight of the day. It had all suppressed her appetite. Now, the scent of the stew was irresistible. "I am, actually, thank you." He dished out 2 generous bowls, the steam rising in fragrant tendrils. He offered her a slice of crusty bread, still warm from a brief warming in the oven. They ate in companionable silence for a while. The simple, hearty meal feeling like a luxurious feast after her journey. The stew was delicious, subtly spiced, a comforting warmth spreading through her. "This is wonderful," she murmured, genuinely impressed. "You're a good cook." "I learned to be. Living alone in remote places tends to encourage self-sufficiency." He chuckled softly. "And a good meal is essential for a clear mind, wouldn't you agree?" She nodded, savoring another spoonful. "Absolutely, especially when facing a deadline, or a new chapter." Their eyes met again, and this time, the unspoken understanding was palpable. They were both here seeking something, both on the cusp of a new chapter, albeit an unplanned one, together. After dinner, Whis cleared the dishes, insisting she relax by the fire. He moved with an effortless efficiency, his presence a comforting hum in the background. She watched him, feeling a curious shift within herself. The guardedness she usually maintained around strangers was slowly beginning to erode under his quiet confidence, his directness, and the unexpected intimacy of their shared situation. He returned, carrying a bottle of dark amber liquid and 2 small, heavy glasses. "A little something to aid digestion, and perhaps to solidify our truce," he said, pouring a measure into each glass. The rich, peaty scent of whiskey filled the air. "Whiskey?" she asked, a smile playing on her lips. "You certainly know how to make a woman feel at home, Mr. Whis." "Just Whis, please, Alara," he corrected softly, handing her a glass. "And I believe a good single malt is always appropriate for a stormy night by the fire." She took a sip. The liquid was smooth, warm, spreading a pleasant heat through her chest. It was a complex flavor, earthy and subtly sweet, much like her initial impression of him. "To our truce then," she said, raising her glass. "To unexpected beginnings," he countered, his eyes holding hers over the rim of his glass. They talked then more freely, the whiskey loosening the last vestiges of her reserve. He spoke of his travels, of ancient texts and forgotten languages, of the thrill of discovery. She found herself sharing details about her photography, her struggles with composition, the elusive nature of capturing true emotion in an image. They found common ground in their shared passion for their art, the pursuit of beauty and truth, each in their own medium. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows on the stone walls. The wind outside continued its mournful song, a constant, wild presence. But inside, with Whis, there was a growing warmth, a surprising sense of connection. He was a captivating storyteller, his voice rich and melodic, painting vivid pictures with his words. She found herself hanging on every syllable, mesmerized not just by the stories, but by the storyteller himself. At one point he reached out, not quite touching her, but gesturing towards her hands, which were cupped around her glass. "Your hands," he observed, his voice a low murmur. "They look like a photographer's hands, strong, yet delicate, capable of both great precision and great tenderness." His observation, so specific and intimate, sent a flush creeping up her neck. She quickly drew her hands back, tucking them into her lap, suddenly self-conscious. "And yours," she managed, her voice a little shaky. "They look like a writer's hands, strong, with a certain ink-stained wisdom." She regretted the words as soon as they left her mouth, feeling foolish. He chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through the room. "Ink-stained wisdom," he repeated, savoring the phrase. "I like that, Alara. Perhaps you have a poet's eye after all." The compliment, coming from him, felt significant. She found herself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. It had been a long time since she'd felt this light, this engaged. The whiskey warmed her from the inside out, softening the edges of her weariness. She felt herself relaxing into the deep cushions of the armchair, her gaze drawn to the flickering fire, then to Whis, then back to the fire. His presence was becoming less of an intrusion, and more of a comfort. An exciting, unsettling comfort. "It's getting late," she said eventually, the words feeling almost reluctant. The thought of retreating to a separate room, breaking this fragile, nascent connection, was suddenly unappealing. Whis nodded, his eyes still holding hers. "It is. The bedrooms are through that archway." He gestured to a stone archway at the far end of the living area. "Yours is the first door on the left. Mine is at the end of the hall. The bathroom is shared, but spacious." He rose, his movements fluid. He walked over to a bookshelf, pulling out a thick, leather-bound volume. "For tonight then, rest well, Alara. We have a lot of sorting out to do in the morning." As he turned to leave, his gaze lingered on her. A silent message passing between them. A recognition of the spark that had ignited, the unspoken possibilities. He paused at the archway, his hand resting on the ancient stone. "One more thing," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, almost lost in the wind's persistent song. "When the storm is at its fiercest, sometimes the wind finds a particular hollow in the rocks down by the cove. It creates a sound, a mournful, beautiful note. Some call it the Whis. If you listen carefully you might hear it." And then he was gone, leaving her alone by the dying fire, the scent of whiskey and wood smoke lingering in the air. Her heart was thrumming, a nervous excitement coursing through her veins. The image of him, framed in the archway, his words a soft promise, replayed in her mind. The Whis, a sound, a secret, a name. She sat there for a long time, listening, not just for the wind, but for the echo of his voice, for the whisper of possibilities that had just been unleashed in the wild, beautiful solitude of Storm Song. The fire was dying down, casting longer, deeper shadows. She felt a profound shift within her, a stirring of emotions she hadn't realized were dormant. This wasn't the quiet escape she'd envisioned. This was something entirely new, entirely unexpected. And perhaps, exactly what she needed. She finally rose, feeling a strange mix of exhilaration and trepidation. She picked up her duffel bag, her fingers brushing against the cool, rough fabric. The corridor was dark, illuminated only by the faint glow from the living room. She found the first door on the left and pushed it open. The room was simple but inviting, with a large, comfortable-looking bed draped in soft linens. A single window looked out onto the tumultuous sea, the waves now invisible in the profound darkness, their roar magnified by the storm. She placed her bag down, and with a sigh, began to unpack, her mind still replaying the evening's events. The air in the room was cool, carrying the scent of salt and damp earth. She changed into her softest pajamas, a silk chemise that felt luxurious against her skin. She wasn't used to sleeping in such a revealing garment, but the cottage felt safe, private, despite Whis being just down the hall. Or perhaps, because of him. She drew back the heavy curtains, gazing out into the inky blackness. The storm was indeed fierce, the wind rattling the panes, the ocean a furious, unseen beast. She pressed her hand against the cool glass, feeling the vibration of the elements. And then, she listened. Through the howling of the wind, through the crash of the waves, she strained her ears. For a moment, she thought she heard it, a faint, almost ethereal note, rising and falling, a mournful, beautiful song carried on the gale. The Whisin. Or perhaps it was just her imagination, inflamed by the whiskey and the unexpected company. She crawled into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. The sheets were cool, then warmed by her body. The storm raged outside, a symphony of wildness. But inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. A storm of anticipation, of burgeoning desire, of a connection she hadn't anticipated and didn't quite understand. She closed her eyes. The image of Whis, his green eyes, his quiet smile, his compelling voice, burned into her mind. She thought of his hands, strong and capable, and the fleeting brush of their fingers. The night stretched out before her, long and full of unspoken promises. This was just the beginning. This was just the beginning. Ilara lay in the vast, antique four-poster bed, the storm outside a tempestuous counterpoint to the quiet thrumming beneath her skin. Rain lashed against the ancient stone walls, and the wind howled like a restless spirit through the glens, rattling the leaded panes of her window. But it wasn't the storm that kept her awake. It was Whis. His name, a low whisper in her mind, carried the weight of a sudden, undeniable presence. She traced the lines of her own palm, remembering the fleeting warmth of his calloused fingers against hers. It had been such a brief, accidental touch, yet it had ignited something primal within her. A spark that now smoldered, threatening to consume her. His eyes, the color of deep moss after a spring rain, held a silent power, a depth that hinted at stories untold and passions carefully guarded. His voice, a resonant baritone, had the capacity to soothe and to stir, a dangerous combination. She shifted, the crisp linen cool against her skin, but her thoughts were anything but cool. They were fervent, alive, replaying every subtle glance, every shared smile, every inflection in his speech. She found herself imagining the texture of his hair beneath her fingers, the strength of his arms around her, the taste of his lips. A blush crept up her neck, even in the darkness of her solitary room. This was absurd. She barely knew the man. And yet her body, her very soul, recognized something in him, an ancient echo of belonging she hadn't known she was missing. Sleep eventually claimed her, a restless patchwork of dreams where Whis was a shadowy, compelling figure against a backdrop of mist and heather, always just out of reach. The morning dawned, muted and grey, the storm having retreated, leaving behind a landscape washed clean and gleaming. A soft, persistent drizzle still fell, clinging to the ancient trees, and making the castle stones glisten. Ilara rose, a different kind of anticipation stirring within her. The day felt pregnant with possibility. She chose her attire with unusual care. A cashmere sweater the color of a winter sky, soft wool trousers, and sturdy walking boots. Practical, yet elegant. She wanted to feel both grounded and ready for whatever the day might bring. Descending the grand staircase, the scent of fresh coffee and burning peat wafted up from the dining hall. As she entered, her gaze immediately sought him out. Whis was standing by the large bay window, a mug cupped in his hands, his profile silhouetted against the diffused light. He was speaking quietly with Mrs. McTavish, his head inclined, a faint smile playing on his lips. He wore a dark, fitted jumper that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders and the lean power of his frame. As if sensing her presence, he turned. Their eyes met across the room, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. The smile faded from his lips, replaced by a look of intense, quiet scrutiny, a warmth in his gaze that sent a shiver down Ilara's spine. It was a look that spoke volumes, acknowledging the unsaid currents that had pulsed between them last night. "Good morning, Ilara," he said, his voice a low rumble that cut through the polite clinking of cutlery. He moved towards her with an easy grace, a predator's silent confidence. "Good morning, Whis," she replied, her voice a little breathier than she intended. She felt a flush rise to her cheeks, a telltale sign of her inner turmoil. He gestured to the breakfast spread. "Mrs. McTavish has outdone herself. The porridge is particularly fine this morning." They settled at the large oak table. The conversation was light, polite, covering the weather and the day's planned activities for the estate. But beneath the surface, an electric current hummed. Their eyes would meet over the rim of a coffee cup or across a plate of smoked salmon, holding for a fraction of a second longer than strictly necessary. Ilara found herself acutely aware of his every movement, the way his strong fingers gripped his mug, the subtle flex of his jaw as he listened, the faint scent of wood smoke, and something undeniably masculine that clung to him. "The drizzle is expected to lift by midday," Whis remarked, looking out the window. "If you're interested, I was planning a ride out to the old standing stones. They're quite remarkable, said to predate the castle by millennia." Ilara's heart gave a little leap. "I'd like that very much," she said, her voice firm, resolute. A chance to spend more time with him, alone, amidst the ancient power of the Highlands. The thought was intoxicating. "Excellent," he said, a genuine smile gracing his lips now, lighting up his eyes. "We'll set off around 10. Wear something warm and waterproof. And sturdy boots. We'll do some walking once we're there." The hours leading up to their departure passed in a blur of anticipation for Ilara. She felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of adventure unburdened by the usual complexities of her life. She found Whis waiting for her in the cobbled stable yard, 2 magnificent horses already saddled. He was wearing a waxed canvas jacket, its practical masculinity somehow enhancing his appeal. "Meet Morag," he said, patting the neck of a sturdy mare with intelligent dark eyes. "She's a good girl, steady and sure-footed." He then turned to his own mount, a powerful dark stallion that seemed to pulse with untamed energy. "And this is Balor. He can be a bit spirited." As he helped her mount Morag, his hands briefly settled on her waist, strong and firm. The contact, though brief, sent a jolt through her, a warmth spreading through her midsection. She could feel the heat of his palms even through her thick sweater. His green eyes met hers, a silent question, a shared understanding of the spark that had just passed between them. He lingered for a moment, his gaze deep and searching, before pulling his hands away. They set off, the rhythmic clopping of hooves on the damp earth, the only sound apart from the wind rustling through the heather. The landscape unfolded before them, a tapestry of greens and browns, dotted with ancient gnarled trees and the silver ribbons of streams. The air was crisp, clean, carrying the scent of damp earth, pine, and the distant tongue of peat fires. Whis rode with an effortless grace, a natural extension of his powerful horse. He pointed out landmarks, a distant loch shrouded in mist, the jagged peaks of a mountain range, a flush of red deer disappearing into the woods. His voice, rich and warm, wove stories of the land, of clan histories and local legends, bringing the ancient landscape to life. Ilara found herself captivated, not just by the beauty of the Highlands, but by Whis himself. The way his dark hair fell across his forehead when he looked down, the strong line of his jaw, the subtle shifts of his powerful frame in the saddle. She noticed the small scar above his left eyebrow, a testament to a life lived fully, perhaps even dangerously. He was a man of the land, rooted and strong, yet there was a deep current of contemplation in his eyes, a thoughtful silence that hinted at a complex inner world. After a ride that seemed both too long and too short, they dismounted near a cluster of ancient weather-beaten stones, standing sentinel on a windswept rise. The drizzle had indeed lifted, leaving the air clear and sharp. The stones were immense, some taller than a man, their surfaces scarred by centuries of wind and rain, covered in a velvety moss. There was a profound sense of history, of quiet power, emanating from them. "They say these stones were places of worship, of ceremony," Whis said, his voice softer now, almost reverent. "Before the castles, before the clans, there were these. Places where the veil between worlds was thin." Elara walked among them, her fingers tracing the rough, cold surfaces. She felt a strange energy here, a connection to something ancient and timeless. Whis stood a little distance away, watching her, his gaze steady and warm. When she turned back to him, he smiled, a slow, genuine smile that reached his eyes and sent a warmth through her. "It's incredible," she breathed, the raw beauty of the place and the quiet intensity of his presence, filling her senses. He joined her, standing close, but not touching. "It is. And sometimes you can almost hear the echoes of the past." He then led her to a smaller, more secluded stone, partially overgrown with ivy. "This one," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate tone, "is said to be a wishing stone. If you place your hand on it and make a wish, with a pure heart it will be granted." He extended his hand palm down, and placed it on the cool, damp surface of the stone. Elara hesitated for a moment, then drawn by an irresistible impulse, placed her hand directly over his. The contact was electric, a jolt that went straight to her core. His fingers, warm and strong, were beneath hers, and the rough stone felt strangely smooth under the double layer of skin. Their eyes met, and in that moment, the world outside them faded. There was only the wind whispering through the heather, the ancient stones, and the profound, undeniable connection that hummed between their palms. What wish would she make? The answer bloomed unbidden in her heart, a secret, potent desire that involved the man whose hand was now pressed beneath hers. She felt his thumb subtly shift, a gentle, almost imperceptible caress against the back of her hand. Her breath hitched. He cleared his throat, a low, husky sound. "We should probably head back. The light will start to fade soon." Reluctantly, they pulled their hands apart. The sudden absence of his touch left a cold ache on her skin. The return journey was quieter, filled with unspoken thoughts. The landscape, now bathed in the soft, fading light of the late afternoon, seemed even more mystical. Elara found herself stealing glances at Whis, his profile etched against the darkening sky, his quiet strength a comforting, yet powerfully alluring presence. Back at the castle, the warmth of the roaring fire in the great hall was a welcome embrace. They shed their outdoor gear, the subtle intimacy of helping each other with stiff buckles and damp jackets creating small charged moments. Whis knelt to tend the fire, the muscles of his back and shoulders flexing beneath his jumper. Elara watched him, a slow heat coiling low in her belly. Later, they found themselves by the roaring hearth, each with a crystal glass of amber liquid, a single malt whiskey, smooth and warming. The other guests had dispersed, some to their rooms, others to the library. It was just the two of them, the crackle of the fire, and the soft glow of the lamps creating an intimate cocoon. "You're very much at home here, aren't you?" Elara asked, her voice soft, watching the flames dance. Whis took a slow sip of his whiskey. "It's in my blood. My family has been tied to this land, this castle, for generations. It's more than just a place. It's a part of who I am." He turned to her, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "And you, Elara? You seem to find a different kind of peace here." She considered his words. "I do. My life. It's often very structured, very demanding. Here there's a wildness, an untamed spirit that resonates with something in me. It's liberating." She met his gaze, a rare vulnerability in her eyes. I didn't realize how much I needed it. He leaned forward slightly, his voice a low murmur. Sometimes, we don't know what we're missing until it finds us. His gaze dropped to her lips for a fleeting moment, then returned to her eyes, intense and knowing. The air between them thickened, charged with unspoken desires. The whiskey warmed her from the inside out, loosening the usual constraints she placed upon herself. She felt a powerful urge to bridge the small distance separating them, to reach out and touch the strong line of his jaw, to feel the warmth of his skin. "Tell me, Rhys," she began, her voice a little husky. "What wish did you make on the stone?" A slow, tantalizing smile spread across his face, a glint in his eyes. He leaned back, taking another sip of his whiskey, prolonging the moment. "Some wishes," he said, his voice a low rumble, "are best kept secret, at least until they're ready to be revealed." His gaze held hers, an undeniable challenge, a promise of something yet to come. Ilara felt her pulse quicken. The unspoken meaning hung heavy in the air, a delicious tension that was almost unbearable. He was playing a dangerous game, and she found herself thrilling to it. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows around them, making their faces shift in the flickering light. The silence stretched, filled with the weight of burgeoning desire, of two souls on the cusp of something profound and passionate. The night was still young, and the castle, old and full of secrets, seemed to hold its breath, waiting. He shifted, a slow, deliberate movement that made the already charged air crackle with renewed intensity. His hand, long-fingered and strong, reached for the ornate silver pitcher on the low table between them, then for her goblet. "More wine, Ilara," he murmured, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the quiet room, a direct address that felt like an intimate caress. Ilara's breath hitched, a tiny, almost imperceptible sound. The casual offer of wine was anything but casual. It was an invitation, a continuation of the unspoken dialogue. Her eyes, wide and luminous in the firelight, met his. The depth of his gaze was breathtaking, a dark, fathomless pool that seemed to see right into the secret chambers of her soul. She felt a blush creep up her neck, a delicious warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. "Please, Rhys," she replied, her voice a little breathy, testing the unfamiliar sound of his name on her tongue. It felt right, a perfect fit for the powerful, enigmatic man before her. He poured the ruby liquid, his movements fluid and graceful, the subtle flecks of muscle beneath the fine fabric of his tunic, catching the light. As he handed her the goblet, his fingers brushed hers, a fleeting, electrifying contact that sent a shiver straight down her spine. It was a spark, igniting a trail of desire that had been smoldering just beneath the surface. She clutched the cool metal, her gaze still locked with his, the wine forgotten. "You seem unsettled," he observed, a slight, knowing curve to his lips. It wasn't a question, but an astute observation, made with an intimacy that surprised her. He leaned back slightly, settling into his chair, yet his presence seemed to expand, filling the space between them. "Unsettled?" Ilara echoed, forcing a light laugh that sounded brittle even to her own ears. "Perhaps merely enchanted. This castle, the fire, the quiet. It's all rather captivating." She tried to sound nonchalant, but her heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Rhys's eyes twinkled, a flash of something ancient and knowing. "Captivating, yes, but I sensed something more. A stirring, perhaps, or a question unasked." He leaned forward again, just slightly, narrowing the distance, his voice dropping to a low, conspiratorial tone. "Tell me, Ilara, what secrets does the night whisper to you?" His directness was disarming, yet thrilling. She found herself wanting to tell him everything, to lay bare the tumultuous landscape of her emotions. But caution, a lifetime companion, held her back. "The night whispers many things," she began, choosing her words carefully. "But mostly it speaks of mystery, of hidden passages and forgotten tales within these old stones." She gestured around the great hall, trying to deflect, but her gaze kept returning to him, drawn by an irresistible force. He chuckled, a rich, resonant sound that vibrated through the very air. "Ah, The castle's secrets. They are many indeed. But I find myself more intrigued by the secrets in your eyes, Ilara. They hold a story I'm eager to hear. The air thickened again, charged with the unspoken challenge. He was peeling back her layers with a quiet confidence that was both alluring and slightly dangerous. She felt a flush rise, but this time it was one of exhilaration. This man saw beyond the polite veneer, straight to the adventurous spirit she usually kept carefully guarded. And what story do you imagine you see, Whis? She dared, tilting her chin slightly, a spark of defiance in her own gaze. He took a slow sip of his wine, his eyes never leaving hers, savoring the moment. A story of a woman who walks with grace, but carries a wildness within. A woman who seeks adventure, but perhaps fears its consequences. A woman who is beautiful, intelligent, and utterly captivating. His voice was a silken caress, each word a brushstroke on her skin, raising goosebumps despite the warmth of the fire. Ilara felt a dizzying rush. His words were a mirror, reflecting back parts of herself she had barely acknowledged, let alone articulated. No one had ever seen her with such clarity, such depth. It was intoxicating. Her breath caught in her throat. You see a great deal, she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. Only what you allow me to see, he corrected softly, his gaze softening, losing its challenging edge and becoming something profoundly tender. But I suspect there is so much more beneath the surface. Tell me, Ilara, what brings you to this remote corner of the world, to my lonely castle? It was a genuine question, stripped of the earlier playful intensity, and it opened a door. She took a steadying breath, the wine in her goblet untouched. I'm a scholar of sorts, an historian, specializing in ancient texts and lost civilizations. I heard whispers of a forgotten library within these walls, rumors of manuscripts untouched for centuries. It was a pilgrimage of sorts. She spoke of her passion, her voice gaining strength, her eyes alight with the fervor of her lifelong pursuit. The lure of discovery, of uncovering forgotten truths, it calls to me more powerfully than any other pursuit. He listened intently, his head tilted, a thoughtful expression on his face. A seeker of truth, he mused, a faint smile playing on his lips. I can appreciate that. My family, the lineage that built and maintained these walls, has always been guardians of knowledge, though perhaps of a different kind. Oh, Ilara prompted, intrigued. What kind? He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped loosely. The firelight danced in his dark hair, highlighting the strong lines of his jaw. We were keepers of secrets, Ilara, of ancient lore, of the balance between the seen and unseen. This castle, you see, is built on a nexus of power. Its stones remember more than just human history. His eyes held a flicker of something ancient, something that resonated with the very air of the castle. Ilara felt a thrill, a delicious shiver of excitement that went beyond mere academic interest. This was the kind of mystery she lived for. Unseen? Power? She breathed, leaning in herself, completely captivated. Are you speaking of magic? Riza's smile deepened, a slow, sensual curve that sent a jolt through her. Perhaps? Or perhaps merely the natural forces of the world, understood and harnessed in ways that modern minds have forgotten. He paused, his gaze sweeping over her face, lingering on her parted lips. And now you, a seeker of truth, have stumbled upon its greatest secret. Which is? She whispered, her heart thrumming. He met her gaze, his eyes dark and intense. That some truths are not meant to be read in books but felt in the soul, and perhaps shared with another. The double meaning hung heavy, a silken thread tightening around them. The conversation had spiraled from a scholarly pursuit to something deeply personal, intimately charged. Ilara felt a tremor pass through her. He wasn't just talking about the castle's secrets anymore. He was talking about them and shared, she repeated, the word tasting sweet and dangerous on her tongue. He reached out, his hand slowly, deliberately, tracing the air between them. Not quite touching her, but the gesture was more potent than any physical contact. Yes, the kind of truth that resonates in the quiet of the night, when all the world sleeps, and only two souls are awake to witness it. His voice dropped to a husky whisper, a velvet caress. The kind of truth that leaves you breathless. Ilara's breath was already hitched in her throat. She found herself leaning further into his magnetic field, her body aching with an unfamiliar longing. The air was thick with the scent of wood smoke, old stone, and something uniquely masculine. A clean, earthy scent that was unmistakably Whis. She wanted to bridge the remaining distance, to feel the warmth of his hand, the strength of his arm. He seemed to sense her desire, a mirror of his own. His gaze dropped to her lips, lingered, then returned to her eyes, seeking permission, offering an unspoken promise. The silence stretched again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just tension, it was anticipation, thick and heady. Then, with a gentle, almost imperceptible movement, he rose from his chair. Ilara watched him, her eyes wide, her heart pounding. He walked slowly to the hearth, picked up a plush, woven blanket that had been draped over a nearby bench, and unfolded it. He then knelt by the fire, smoothing the blanket over the ancient rugs, creating a more intimate space directly in front of the flickering flames. The gesture was tender, inviting, and utterly irresistible. He looked up at her, his dark eyes gleaming in the firelight. It grows late, Ilara. The night air carries a chill even within these walls. Come, share the warmth. His voice was soft, persuasive, a siren song that pulled her inexorably towards him. Ilara didn't hesitate. She rose, her movements a little shaky, her eyes never leaving his. As she walked towards him, the heavy silence of the great hall seemed to amplify the sound of her own heartbeat, a frantic drumbeat of excitement and trepidation. The castle indeed held its breath. She knelt beside him on the plush blanket, closer now than they had been all evening. The heat of the fire kissed her skin, but it was the proximity of Whis that truly set her alight. He was so close she could feel the radiating warmth of his body, smell the intoxicating scent of him more clearly. He didn't touch her, but his presence was a palpable force drawing her in. "That's better," he murmured, his gaze sweeping over her, a slow, possessive appreciation that made her insides clench with pleasure. He then reached for the edge of the blanket and gently, slowly, drew it around her shoulders, tucking it in with meticulous care. As he did, his knuckles brushed against her neck, a fleeting touch that sent a shiver of pure delight through her. She felt the soft wool against her skin, a comforting barrier that paradoxically made her feel more exposed, more vulnerable to him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. She felt a profound sense of rightness, of belonging, in this moment by this fire, with this man. He settled back onto the blanket beside her, their knees almost touching, their shoulders just inches apart. The fire crackled, casting their faces in a mosaic of light and shadow, making his features seem even more sculpted, more defined. The silence that followed was different again, no longer just anticipation, but a comfortable, intimate quiet, filled with the warmth of the fire and the burgeoning heat between them. "You mentioned a wildness within," Ilara said, breaking the spell, wanting to continue the thread of their earlier conversation, to understand him, as he seemed to understand her. "What makes you say that?" He turned his head fully towards her, his gaze intense. "The way your eyes light up when you speak of discovery. The unwavering determination in your posture, even when you try to soften it. The slight tremble in your voice that betrays a passion you try to keep hidden. It's not a wildness of recklessness, Ilara, but a wildness of spirit. A refusal to be caged by convention." He paused, a gentle smile playing on his lips. "It's beautiful." Her breath hitched. No one had ever described her like that. It was as if he had peeled away all the layers of societal expectation and seen the raw, untamed core of her being. She felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, not of sadness, but of profound recognition and gratitude. "And you, Whis," she responded, her voice thick with emotion. What of your wildness? You speak of ancient lore, of unseen forces. What secrets do you keep deep within these castle walls? His smile faded slightly, replaced by a contemplative expression. He stared into the flames, as if seeking answers there. My wildness perhaps is the burden of memory, the weight of generations of knowledge passed down, of duties inherited. This castle is not just stone and mortar to me, Ilara. It is a living entity, a repository of souls and stories. And I am its latest guardian. His voice was tinged with a faint melancholy, a hint of loneliness that tugged at her heart. She reached out instinctively, her hand hovering for a moment before she gently placed it on his arm, just above the elbow. The muscle beneath her palm was firm, warm. It was the first truly intentional physical contact between them, a small bridge across the chasm of their shared unspoken desires. That sounds like a heavy burden, she murmured, her thumb stroking the rough fabric of his tunic. He turned his head, his dark eyes meeting hers, a flicker of surprise, and then deep appreciation in their depths. He didn't pull away. Instead, he slowly, deliberately, turned his arm, his hand coming to rest over hers, enveloping it in his warmth. His fingers were strong, slightly calloused, a comforting presence. It can be, he admitted, his voice softer now, more intimate. But it is also a privilege, to be connected to something so ancient, so enduring, to protect its mysteries. He squeezed her hand gently, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin of her knuckles. And sometimes, he added, his gaze dropping to their joined hands, then back to her eyes, it is a very lonely privilege. The admission hung in the air, raw and vulnerable. Ilara felt a wave of tenderness wash over her, a fierce desire to assuage that loneliness, to share the burden. She tightened her grip on his hand, a silent promise of companionship. You don't have to be lonely, Rhys, she whispered, her voice husky with emotion. Not tonight. He inhaled sharply, his gaze deepening, burning into hers. The intensity of his stare was almost unbearable, a silent question. An invitation. A desperate plea. He slowly lifted their joined hands, bringing hers to his lips. He didn't kiss her palm, but pressed a soft, lingering kiss to the back of her hand, his lips warm and firm against her skin. The gesture was chivalrous, yet profoundly sensual, a promise of deeper intimacy. Ilara felt a jolt of pure pleasure shoot through her, from her hand, up her arm, and straight to her core. Her breath hitched. Her eyes fluttered closed for a moment, savoring the sensation, the delicate scent of his skin. When she opened them, he was watching her, a hunger in his eyes that mirrored her own. Ilara, he breathed, his voice a low, guttural rumble, laced with a desire that sent shivers down her spine. He slowly, deliberately, moved his hand from hers, his fingers tracing a path up her arm over her shoulder to cup her cheek. His thumb stroked her skin, a feather-light touch that felt like fire. Her skin tingled where he touched her. She leaned into his touch, her eyes half closed, a soft sigh escaping her lips. His thumb brushed over the sensitive skin beneath her eye, then along the curve of her jaw, sending exquisite sensations coursing through her. You are more beautiful than any manuscript, more captivating than any lost civilization, he murmured, his voice a silken whisper that seemed to wrap around her, drawing her closer. His eyes devoured her, tracing every curve and line of her face. She felt herself tremble, a delicious tremor that started deep within her. The air between them was so thick, so charged it was almost palpable. Her gaze locked with his, searching, pleading. She wanted him to kiss her, with an aching intensity that surprised her. He seemed to read her unspoken desire. His gaze dropped to her lips again, lingering there, a silent promise. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he began to lean in, his eyes never leaving hers, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But she had no desire to escape. She leaned in too, closing the last few inches, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm in her chest. His breath, warm and tasting faintly of wine, caressed her lips. The anticipation was exquisite, almost unbearable. She closed her eyes, waiting. her body humming with a desperate longing. Then finally, his lips met hers. It was a soft, tentative touch at first, a gentle exploration, a testing of the waters. His lips were warm, firm, and incredibly soft. Ilara responded instantly, her own lips parting slightly, inviting him in. The kiss deepened, slowly, deliberately, a tender dance of discovery. He tasted of wine and something uniquely him, clean, earthy, intoxicating. A soft moan escaped her throat, a sound she barely recognized as her own. His hand tightened on her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin, as if to anchor her to the moment. Her own hands, almost without conscious thought, rose to cup his face, her fingers tangling in the silken strands of his dark hair at his temples. He groaned, a low, masculine sound that vibrated through her, igniting a deeper fire within her. The tenderness in his kiss gave way to a burgeoning passion, a hunger that matched her own. His lips became more demanding, more insistent, exploring every curve of her mouth, coaxing a deeper response from her. She kissed him back with an intensity she hadn't known she possessed, pouring all her longing, all her burgeoning affection into the embrace. The world outside them, the grand hall, the ancient castle, the very night itself, faded into insignificance. There was only the warmth of the fire, the intoxicating taste of his lips, the feel of his skin beneath her fingers. He pulled back slightly, just enough for their lips to still brush, his forehead resting against hers, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His eyes, dark and heavy-lidded, gazed into hers, filled with a mixture of raw desire and profound emotion. "Ilara," he whispered, his voice hoarse, "you are magnificent." Her heart swelled with a feeling so potent it almost brought tears to her eyes. She reached up, her thumb tracing the strong line of his jaw, feeling the slight stubble beneath her touch. "Whis," she breathed, her voice equally raw, "you are everything." He leaned in again, this time with a fierce urgency, claiming her lips in a deeper, more passionate kiss that left her breathless. His hand moved from her cheek, sliding down her neck, tangling in her hair at the nape, tilting her head to deepen the angle of their kiss. Her fingers tightened in his hair, pulling him closer, wanting to melt into him. The kiss became a torrent of sensation, a swirling vortex of desire and longing. His tongue gently traced the seam of her lips, a silent plea for entry, and she granted it willingly, eagerly. Their tongues met, danced, intertwined, a sensual exploration that sent shivers of pure pleasure cascading through her. She felt his other hand leave the blanket, moving slowly, deliberately to her waist. His fingers splayed across her back, pressing her gently yet firmly against his body. She could feel the hard planes of his chest against her breasts, the warmth of his skin radiating through their clothing. Every nerve ending in her body seemed to awaken, humming with a vibrant electric energy. The kiss went on, a timeless exploration of burgeoning passion. It was fierce, tender, demanding, and utterly intoxicating. When he finally broke away, it was only by a fraction, their lips still swollen and tingling, their breaths ragged and uneven. "I have waited for you," he confessed, his voice a low, guttural murmur against her lips. "Though I did not know it was you I awaited." Ilara's heart ached with the beauty of his words, the profound intimacy of the moment. "And I for you," she whispered back, her eyes shining with unshed tears of joy. She felt a connection with him that transcended words, a bond that felt ancient and destined. He moved his hand from her waist, slipping it beneath the edge of the blanket, his fingers tracing the curve of her hip, sending a fresh wave of heat through her. His gaze was burning, dark with unfulfilled desire. "Come," he whispered, his eyes still locked with hers, a silent invitation, a promise of deeper delights. He slowly, gracefully, rose to his feet, pulling her up with him. The blanket fell away, forgotten on the rug, as he drew her into his arms. Her body pressed against his, soft curves against hard planes, the full length of her against the full length of him. She felt the heat of his body, the powerful thrum of his heart against hers. His arms wrapped tightly around her, holding her close possessively. She buried her face in the hollow of his neck, inhaling his scent, feeling utterly safe and utterly desired. He held her for a long moment, simply breathing her in, before slowly, gently, he began to move. He didn't speak, but the message was clear. They moved away from the dying embers of the fire, away from the grand open space of the hall. His steps were slow, deliberate, leading her deeper into the castle, into the shadowed corridors, towards a promise of further intimacy, of secrets yet to be unveiled, of desires yet to be fully explored. The night indeed was still young, and the castle, old and full of secrets, now held its breath for all him. He led her through a labyrinth of hushed corridors, where tapestries depicting ancient hunts whispered tales in the dim light, and the very air seemed to thicken with anticipation. Her hand, still enveloped in his, felt a comforting warmth, a steadfast anchor in the deepening shadows. Each step was a quiet drumbeat of their shared journey, away from the echoes of the grand hall, towards a space known only to them. The scent of old stone mingled with something earthier, deeper, perhaps the faint lingering aroma of him, or simply the scent of the castle itself, breathing around them. Finally he paused before a heavy carved oak door, its surface worn smooth by centuries of touch. With a gentle push, it swung inward without a sound, revealing a chamber bathed in the soft, flickering glow of a hearth fire. This was no austere bedchamber, but a sanctuary designed for comfort and intimacy. Rich velvet drapes hung at the windows, muting the distant starlight, while a vast, four-poster bed, draped in swathes of silk and linen, dominated the room. A small carved table beside the fire held 2 goblets and a decanter, promising further warmth. He released her hand only to place his palm gently at the small of her back, guiding her forward into the room. The warmth of the fire embraced her, chasing away the chill of the stone corridors. She turned to face him, her eyes, now accustomed to the low light, tracing the planes of his face, the intensity of his gaze. He reached out, his fingers brushing a stray strand of hair from her cheek, a touch so tender it made her breath catch. "You are beautiful," he murmured, his voice a low thrum that resonated deep within her. It wasn't a question, but a statement of undeniable truth, spoken with a reverence that made her heart ache with a sweet, exquisite pain. He didn't rush. With unhurried grace, he untied the velvet ribbons of her gown, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck, sending a shiver down her spine. The fabric, heavy and rich, slid from her shoulders, pooling around her feet like a forgotten dream. She stood before him in the soft undergarments, feeling suddenly vulnerable, yet utterly cherished. His eyes, dark and knowing, lingered on her, not with hunger, but with a profound admiration that made her feel more seen than ever before. Then, it was her turn. Her hands, trembling slightly, rose to his tunic, unfastening the clasps, one by one. The rough wool gave way to the warmth of his skin, and she felt the powerful thrum of his heartbeat beneath her fingertips. His muscles flexed beneath her touch, as she peeled away the layers, revealing the breadth of his shoulders, the sculpted strength of his chest. He stood tall and magnificent, a man forged of strength and tenderness, now laid bare before her. He reached for her again, his hands settling on her waist, drawing her closer until the heat of his body seeped into hers. Their eyes locked, a silent conversation passing between them, of longing, of trust, of the profound connection that had blossomed between them this night. His lips found hers then, not with the exploratory tentative kiss from earlier, but with a deep, consuming passion that stole her breath away. It was a kiss that promised everything, asked for nothing but shared surrender. He lifted her effortlessly into his arms, carrying her to the bed, the silk cool against her skin as he laid her down. He followed, his weight settling beside her, and then over her, supporting himself on his forearms, never breaking their gaze. The world outside the castle walls, the very concept of time, faded into irrelevance. There was only the warmth of the fire, the scent of their mingled bodies, and the soft sighs that escaped her lips as his touch became more intimate, more insistent. His lips trailed down her throat, tasting the delicate skin, sending tremors through her. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, urging him on. He moved with a tender ferocity, a perfect blend of power and devotion that left her breathless, exquisitely aware of every nerve ending. The friction of skin on skin, the rising heat, the gasps that escaped them both, were the only sounds in their private world. They moved together, a timeless rhythm that spoke of ancient desires and a bond newly forged. Each thrust was a promise, each whisper a vow. The climax, when it came, was a wave of pure sensation, a culmination of all the unspoken longing, a release that transcended the physical, binding their spirits together in a shimmering, incandescent moment. Her body arched, her cries muffled against his shoulder as she dissolved into a blissful chaos. Afterward, he held her close, her head resting on his chest, the slow, steady beat of his heart, a comforting lullaby. The fire in the hearth had softened to glowing embers, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. She felt utterly cherished, profoundly loved, her body replete, her heart overflowing. The castle, which had once felt so vast and imposing, now felt like a warm, protective embrace, a sanctuary for their shared intimacy. He stroked her hair, his fingers tracing patterns on her skin, a silent testament to the night's journey. She nestled closer, inhaling the scent of him, of their shared passion, feeling utterly content. The night was no longer young, but it had yielded its deepest secrets, its most profound desires. As sleep began to claim her, she knew, with an unwavering certainty, that this was not the end, but merely the beautiful, breathtaking beginning of their story, woven into the very fabric of the old castle, and etched forever into the depths of her soul.